Picture a queen who ruled a vast empire, yet her stench was so overpowering that foreign diplomats nearly passed out in her presence. Her grin resembled a rotting blackened stump, her hair a wig writhing with living vermin. Her idea of bathing involved steeping in a foul concoction of wilted petals and sweat. She embodied royal greatness, yet people recoiled from her. This isn't a tale from some dark medieval legend. It was the daily disturbing truth behind one of England's most iconic monarchs. Imagine a woman of such power. She defied religious authorities, outwitted killers, and expanded her realm's influence. Yet behind those fortified palace doors, her body decayed beneath layers of perfume, poison, and delusion. Elizabeth I was an enigma, outwardly divine and sovereign, but inwardly a woman who had not washed properly in months, idolized by Shakespeare, yet too pained to chew, a brilliant politician veiling her collapsing flesh beneath a mask of chemicals. Historians remember her glory, but this account reveals the rancid truth beneath her powdered illusion. The Virgin Queen was infamous for some of the most vile, dangerous, and revolting hygiene practices ever recorded in royal archives. Blackened teeth that terrified the court, wigs infested with parasites, skin so damaged by lead-based makeup that it peeled, a funeral so offensive it nearly emptied the streets. These weren't eccentric habits, they were compulsions, born from fear, obsession with control, and the suffocating weight of image. In this video you'll discover why Elizabeth, cloaked in magnificence, was dreaded even by those closest to her, and why the stench of her secrets still clings to whispers about her rotting corpse. It's the year 1580. You're an ambassador sent to negotiate with one of the most powerful figures in all of Europe. You enter her magnificent chamber, where sunlight spills through stained glass windows, casting jewel-like patterns across the stone floor. And there she stands, regal, poised, a living portrait of majesty. But then she opens her mouth, and the stench strikes you like a fist to the stomach. You try not to react, but your eyes water. A question flashes through your mind. Is something rotting inside her? Queen Elizabeth I wasn't merely rumored to have bad breath. Her mouth was infamous. Inside, her gums clung to yellowed, blackened teeth that looked more like corpses than bone. Her oral cavity was described as a chamber of decay, filled with the stench of death. Diplomats wrote about it. Courtiers whispered. Her own attendants begged her to see a dentist. But Elizabeth stood firm. She wasn't just a ruler, she was a woman, and in her eyes pain equaled weakness. Her dental ruin began in her 20s, fueled by genetics, anxiety, and a sugar-heavy diet made possible by the spoils of her Caribbean colonies. Sugar was a status symbol, and Elizabeth adored it. Toothbrushes, as we know them, didn't exist. Cleaning involved rubbing a cloth soaked in soot or salt, barely more effective than scraping with a rock, while nobles tried coral powder, rosemary ash, or even urine to preserve their teeth. Elizabeth believed in something far sweeter, honey. She trusted it to protect her enamel. In reality, it destroyed it. By her 40s, many of her molars were gone. What remained were rotting black stubs, compared by some envoys to wooden pegs in a bloody field. Chewing became agony. Messengers described her wincing in pain while trying to eat soft bread. Meat was out of the question. Her kitchen staff resorted to boiling everything, chicken, beef, even vegetables, into grey mush. Still, no one dared comment. One court doctor recommended extraction. She exiled him. Another offered to pull a rotted tooth. She told him to pull one of his own. First, to prove it didn't hurt. He obeyed, screamed, bled, and collapsed. She simply smiled and walked off, cradling her aching jaw. It wasn't pain that terrified her. It was vulnerability. In a world where women were seen as fragile, Elizabeth could not risk appearing soft. So, she created rituals. She chewed cloves and cardamom, dabbed rose petals inside her mouth, and had silver utensils crafted to enhance her appearance at meals. But silver couldn't hide the stench. Diplomats coughed, struggled to listen. Word leaked. One Spanish envoy wrote home, "She is brilliant, majestic, but her mouth is a graveyard." As her teeth decayed, so did her eloquence. Once celebrated for her sharp rhetoric, her speech became muffled, distorted by a collapsing mouth. Even playwrights like Shakespeare began adapting their scripts, selecting words that wouldn't betray the Queen's faltering diction. Public meals turned into performances of deception. She would raise her goblet, force a regal smile, then slip behind silken veils or decorative screens to eat in private, or avoid eating altogether. Her maids were sworn to silence, but not all stayed loyal. Some wrote of the unbearable stench, not of latrines or illness, but of the Queen's own breath, fetid and haunting. Terrified physicians made attempts to help. They proposed filling her damaged teeth with thin layers of gold, She refused. Herbal mouth rinses were suggested. She accused them of witchcraft. Eventually the rot reached her jaw. The skin beneath her cheeks sagged inward, pain extending across her neck, into her temples. Still, she declined treatment. Elizabeth's strength wasn't drawn from legislation or military might alone. It flowed from the myth of her eternal youth, her untouched beauty, her godlike image. That illusion had to endure. To maintain it, she darkened her lips even more, smiled through the ache, and forbade anyone from glimpsing her without makeup. Paintings lied on her behalf. They showed a glowing sovereign with pearl-white teeth and fresh, smooth skin. In truth, these were illusions painted under duress. Artists knew the penalty of honesty could be death. She would rather rot in silence than appear frail in public. Her smile became a tomb no one dared to uncover, and her mouth, if you think that was the worst of it, you're wrong. Beneath her glorious red wig, a worse horror may have been festering. Let us now consider water, what most would call cleansing, pure, innocent. For Elizabeth, it was something else entirely, a threat. She didn't just reject water in her cup, she feared it on her skin. In an era when English rivers were open sewers and medical science resembled superstition, her concern wasn't completely irrational. But for Elizabeth, suspicion grew into fixation. She believed water could seep into her pores and poison her bloodstream. Washing to her wasn't safe. It was a mortal danger. Her physicians reinforced this paranoia. One even warned, if you bathe, your inner self may never dry again. Your spirit might drown from within. So the Queen turned away from cleanliness and embraced an alternative, perfume, and not just dabs or droplets, oceans of it. Her hygiene rituals were not about washing but covering up. Each morning, attendants brought her cloth steeped in wine, vinegar, and rose water. They gently dabbed her skin, not to clean, but to perfume. Her gowns were soaked in fragrant oils, myrrh, musk, sandalwood. These didn't just veil her natural scent, they mingled with it. Beneath 6 or more layers, corsets, kamenises, petticoats, bodices, her skin simmered. Even in high summer, she remained wrapped in aromatic armor. But heat brought sweat, and sweat fed the rot. A French ambassador once described the Queen's scent as a putrid sweetness, like wilted roses laced with something spoiled. Upon entering her chamber, visitors encountered not fresh air, but a haze of incense, dried lavender, and the stale tang of unwashed cloth. Elizabeth refused frequent linen changes. She claimed her body's smell guided her dreams, yet her maids, pale and nauseated, remembered otherwise. One recounted how her nightgown had become so stiff with oils and perspiration that it stood upright on its own. Still, Elizabeth was obsessed with outer purity. Her courtiers had to appear spotless. Anyone who dared emit the slightest body odor risked being banished from court for days. And yet, behind the illusion of opulence, her own routines concealed grime. For all her fear of bathing, she did own a bath, a porcelain masterpiece decorated with golden cherubs, brought along on royal progressions, but it was seldom used, and never as intended. When she did choose to bathe, the ceremony was elaborate. Attendants would scatter violets, marigolds, and roses over the bottom of the tub. Lukewarm water, never too hot nor cold, was added carefully. It was even blessed by a royal priest. Elizabeth would lower herself slowly into the floral stew, not to scrub, but to inhale. She didn't permit her servants to look at her directly. They stood with bowed heads, waiting in silence as she steeped, sometimes for hours. But the water wasn't changed. As it darkened, more perfumes were added, civet, musk, patchouli, turning the bath into a thick aromatic soup. When she emerged, her skin wrinkled and waxy. She was wrapped not in cloth but in fine satin, intended to lock in whatever radiance the ritual had bestowed. One servant likened the smell to funeral flowers left too long in milk. These rare bathings didn't cleanse her, they compounded the problem. Her perspiration, sealed beneath layers of makeup, laced with lead, fermented. The skin under her arms was never wiped. Her spine remained untouched for weeks, and still, she believed herself clean. Because for Elizabeth, cleanliness wasn't about health, it was about beauty. The illusion mattered more than infection. Fragrance was purity, aesthetic was truth. But her body eventually turned against her, and as you'll soon hear, even the grave couldn't contain the truth. Painful rashes developed on her thighs. Open sores festered beneath the corsets. She refused to loosen. Dried perfume clung to her skin like brittle bark. Her physicians pleaded with her, begging to clean her body, even partially. She wouldn't allow it. One doctor tried to apply an ointment behind her ear. She shrieked, accused him of witchcraft, and banished him from court. To modern minds, her terror seems absurd, but in Elizabeth's view, water had become the ultimate danger. In her imagination, it crawled with unseen poisons, ready to breach her skin and kill her. She wasn't alone in her fears. Other nobles of the time also avoided bathing, but Elizabeth elevated it to an almost spiritual resistance. She believed her body absorbed strength from oils, sweat purified her soul. Her scent, though sickening to others, was divine to her. Foreign courts gossiped behind closed doors. Some joked that England's Tudor roses was rotting on the stem, but no one said such things to her face, because she was the queen, and in her world, her smell wasn't offensive, it was sacred, an extension of her majesty, a symbol of her untouchable power. As her bathing habits declined, a new obsession surfaced: cosmetics. To obscure the advancing decay of her unwashed skin, Elizabeth began covering her face in thick layers of white lid paint. Fragrances disguised the stench, powder veiled the blemishes, yet the reality remained. Behind all the scent, the mystique, the illusion, her flesh was failing under the weight of her own legend. Makeup, for Elizabeth, wasn't just for allure, it became a shield, a royal statement, a claim to divinity. But the very materials that elevated her image slowly began to corrode her from the inside. Elizabeth's signature porcelain complexion wasn't natural. It was laboriously crafted with a substance known as Venetian ceruse, Europe's cosmetic obsession of the era, and one of its deadliest. This white paste combined vinegar and white lid, the same substance we now associate with organ failure and neurological breakdown. Elizabeth used it daily, desperate to conceal imperfections. But this wasn't mere vanity, it was survival. At 29, she endured smallpox, surviving but forever marked by scars that haunted her. The disease had pitted her face, and she dreaded the gaze of others upon it. To mask these signs, she turned to the deadly ceruse, layering it onto her skin like a sculptor. In candlelight, it gave her a glowing, ethereal appearance. Silver-skinned, praised in verse and worshipped in portraits. But ceruse did not remain a surface adornment. It sank deeper, entering her pores, seeping into her veins, and poisoning her blood. Her skin dried out, cracked and peeled. Still, she continued to apply more. Beneath the mask, sores formed, her cheeks ulcerated, yet the makeup was never fully removed, only touched up. Over time, her appearance stiffened, the mobility of her features diminished, and even a faint smile could reopen wounds. By her mid-40s, her face had become an expressionless mask, regal yet rigid. Portraits from this period reflect this frozen majesty, not out of serenity, but necessity. Pain was the price of appearance. Her cosmetic regimen didn't stop at ceruse. To create a rosy flush, she used cinnabar, mercury sulfide. Her lip color came from vermilion, another mercury-laced compound. She painted her eyes with lamp black, a mixture of soot and ash. To enlarge her pupils, she used belladonna, a poisonous plant. An ambassador once described her gaze as resembling bloodied moons. Every product inflicted its toll. Her hair thinned, her brows disappeared, her lashes fell out. She powdered her forehead, drew on eyebrows, and wore towering wigs fashioned from horsehair, perfumed to mask her scalp's odor. Despite warnings from doctors that her skin was deteriorating, she persisted. "My face is my kingdom," she once declared. This wasn't pride, it was terror. In a court obsessed with beauty and youth, to appear weak was to invite chaos, so she clung to her facade with increasing desperation. As the poisoning advanced, symptoms worsened. She developed tremors, sleeplessness, and paranoid delusions. She accused maids of betrayal, flew into rages over small slights, and suffered from joint stiffness. Her fingers curled, her posture bent. Yet every morning she sat for hours, while oils, pigments, and powders were applied by sweating attendants under flickering candlelight. These rituals left her radiant and drained. Fainting became common. While her doctors cited exhaustion, they privately blamed the toxins. One maid remembered lifting a layer of paint from Elizabeth's cheek, only to expose raw, festering flesh. She vomited at the sight. The Queen slapped her in response. Still, in public, Elizabeth endured. She remained the untouchable Virgin Queen, immortal in the eyes of her subjects. In private, she decayed. No one dared mention it aloud. Foreign envoys mocked it in letters home. They wrote of a queen who once radiated divinity, now cloaked in a scent of slow spoilage. Perfume no longer masked the truth. Elizabeth's loyal subjects, however, saw only what they were meant to. Her public persona was carefully curated, as obsessively managed as any modern influencer's brand. Portraits were retouched, descriptions edited, reality distorted, under thick coatings of white powder and rouge. Her frail, inflamed body remained hidden. In her later years, she even banned mirrors from her chambers. No one, not even herself, was allowed to reflect her true state back at her. She was wasting away, visibly and invisibly. Her jaw drooped. Her once fair skin took on a yellow hue, stained by liver failure and poisoned by lead-based makeup. Still, she continued to wear the same face paint every day, refusing to be seen without it. Even as she lay dying in 1603, her attendants refused to remove the makeup. Her image, her divinity, had to remain intact, even as her soul slipped away. But when the embalmers finally peeled back the final mask, horror awaited them. Her cheeks were riddled with abscesses, her lips were stuck together, her brow was cracked and peeling, her eyes were sunken and bloodshot. Beneath her chin, her skin had completely sloughed off. The woman who ruled like a god was already half a corpse before death took her. The very substances she used to maintain the illusion of eternal youth had corrupted the flesh beneath. Her face became the ultimate symbol of her reign. Power does not prevent decay. Beauty does not defy death. Even monarchs rot beneath their crowns. And yet, her appearance wasn't the most grotesque element of her legacy. Hidden inside her wigs lived a deeper, more personal horror. For Elizabeth, royalty had many faces, and one of the most iconic wasn't crafted from gold or adorned with pearls, but formed from hair, glue, powder, and occasionally, vermin. Her wigs weren't just fashion, they were armor, hiding a truth too fragile to face. In her late 30s, her natural copper hair began falling out in thick, uneven patches. This was the price of daily applications of toxic creams and lead-heavy foundations, mercury, soot, starch. These substances choked her pores, killed her hair follicles, and left behind a damaged, barren scalp. Bit by bit, strand by strand, her hairline retreated. She panicked. In Elizabeth's court, hair was a symbol of strength, fertility, and royal youth. To lose it was to lose command, so she turned to wigs. Dozens of them, each more elaborate than the last. Some were braided, some curled, some shaped into fantastic silhouettes. All of them, however, were never washed. Water risked warping their delicate construction. Most were made of horsehair or goat hair, sometimes even stolen from the heads of maids or corpses. They were held together with a thick glue made of animal fat, egg, and starch, and affixed to a wire frame. Once styled, they were powdered white, just like her skin, and where there is warmth and starch, there is life. Lice were rampant, so were fleas, but something worse had found a home in her crown. Maggots. One servant whispered of discovering pale larvae squirming near the base of her scalp one morning. No one dared speak the truth. To acknowledge the rot was to invite punishment, or worse. So they applied scented oils, dusted lavender around the edges, and replaced the wig as if nothing had happened. Foreign ambassadors often noted a foul, musty odor clinging to Elizabeth's head, not quite human, not quite floral. One Italian wrote, "The Queen of England wears a garden on her crown, though I fear it houses more than flowers." Another diplomat famously fainted mid-audience. Rumors blamed the smell from her hairpiece. Still, she carried on. Her wigs were not mere accessories, they were ceremonial. Every morning, her day began with the wig ritual. 2 maids, 3 guards, and 1 priest attended. Silence was required. The chosen wig had to be blessed before touching the royal scalp. Any strand that fell was buried. If the wig slipped during court, all proceedings were paused until it was fixed. Some wigs were so tall, the chapel had to be physically modified to accommodate her entrance. Arches carved taller to make way. Her favorite, reportedly, was a massive red corkscrew-shaped piece studded with pearls. It weighed nearly 20 pounds. She needed a specially designed steel brace to wear it, fitted around her shoulders and neck. Underneath these monuments of vanity, her scalp festered, sores, pustules, rashes, fungal infections, and open wounds frothed beneath the glue and heat. When physicians pleaded to let her skin breathe, she snapped. "My scalp is not subject to peasant science, it holds the crown." This was not just vanity, it was ideology. Elizabeth saw herself as divine, As the sacred body of England itself, a blemish on her scalp was a crack in the nation. To maintain illusion, she accepted torment. More pins were added. Dozens, some drew blood, some embedded into her skin. Medical care was refused. She preferred pain to vulnerability. In the winter of 1601, a court servant reported she collapsed during a meeting. Infection had spread to the bone, yet before she was fully conscious, the wig was reapplied. The ceremony must never break. Every court appearance became a ritual of gore and grandeur. Servants stood by with perfumed fans. Maids dabbed her sweating brow. Pages adjusted the towering crown of curls on her head. Behind the scenes, her wigs were kept locked away. Guards protected them at night. They were cleaned with vinegar baths and dried over red-hot coals, but they never fully dried. Moisture bred mold deep in the lining. Sometimes, her ornate traveling cases released a stench no one dared question. No one dared ask if the Queen's glory was rotting from within. The Queen's wigs had become more than fashion. They were relics. Speaking ill of them bordered on sacrilege. When a noble woman muttered that Elizabeth's hair smelled like wet crypts, she was swiftly exiled to Cornwall within days. No one dared repeat such disrespect, but the wigs were not just grotesque, they were hazardous. The lead-based powder Elizabeth used on them, intended to match her pallid complexion, seeped through the scalp and entered the bloodstream. Modern historians now suspect the strange symptoms that plagued her later years. Mental fog, hand tremors, dizzy spells were signs of prolonged lead poisoning. Ironically, it may have all begun with her crown. Toward the end of her life, her scalp had deteriorated so terribly that she was fitted with a custom iron mesh beneath the wig to support its weight. The mesh dug into her skin, causing open lesions, yet still, she clung to the illusion. Her natural hair was gone, her flesh was withering, but the grandeur lived on. In her final hours, she reportedly asked for her wig. Her last breaths were drawn beneath a canopy of horsehair, starch and powder, the scent of lavender, doing its best to mask the smell of slow decay. Even after death, the wig remained affixed. The embalmers refused to remove it, fearing what they might uncover beneath. The royal scalp had become too fragile, too macerated, to risk exposure. And so the wig, that grotesque crown of deception, became the final mask of a queen who had built her entire existence upon illusion. But even the wigs paled in comparison to what happened to her body after death, for the final scandal of cleanliness began only after her breathing ceased. Elizabeth I had ruled for over 40 years, but in her final days, the once glorious queen had all but vanished. Her body, like her realm, was unraveling. Those who sat beside her in her last moments described a peculiar silence. The queen no longer spoke, no longer schemed, no longer dressed in gold and finery. She lay rigid, wrapped in velvet, her eyes vacant. She refused food, declined water, slept not at all. Her attendants begged her to rest. She only whispered, "If I close my eyes, I shall never open them again." And she was right. Death arrived in March of 1603, but with it came a gruesome and unexpected turn. Elizabeth's body began to rot far faster than anticipated. The speed alarmed the court. Physicians blamed her age, the damp winter air, the proximity of too many candles. But the truth was far more sinister. For years, Elizabeth had unknowingly transformed her body into a toxic cocktail of chemical rot, mercury-laced creams, lead-based powders, moldy wigs, poisonous oils. Her system had been corroding from within, and when death released the final tension holding it together, the destruction surged forward. The Queen's ladies-in-waiting were the first to notice, swelling beneath her eyes, lips darkening, the once sharp chin dissolving into bloated softness. These weren't signs of peace, but evidence of internal breakdown. The scent emerged immediately. Despite the thick layers of balm, resin and perfume, it could not be stopped. Her corpse began to ooze. Dark, putrid liquid seeped from her nostrils. Her neck ballooned, her fingers curled into stiff claw-like contortions. Panic took hold. Maids burned herbs. They drenched the room with rosewater. One servant placed a dish of vinegar at her feet, a medieval trick to mask the scent of decay, but nothing worked. The chamber was eventually sealed. Even her most devoted handmaids began to falter. One fainted. Another vomited behind a curtain. Still, Elizabeth lay in state, cloaked in gold, enclosed in a crimson-lined coffin, replaced once due to the overpowering odor.
The truth remained unspoken. No one dared say it aloud. The Virgin Queen was decomposing faster than anyone had imagined. The funeral was delayed. Ministers argued. Should the wig be removed? Should they reapply makeup? Could the coffin even be opened without flooding the room with the stench? The embalmers worked frantically. Their tools failed them. Beneath the foundation, her skin had split. Her cheeks had collapsed. One eye had sunk. The radiant face that once inspired poetry was now a grim parody of itself. Still, she was presented to the public. Ceremony had to proceed. They performed their last trick. They buried her under lies. The death mask was repainted to resemble an ideal. Serene, perfect, unblemished. A waxen fantasy. Her hands were gloved, her lips sewn, her neck wrapped in layers of lace so dense that only the faint outline of her chin could be seen. The coffin procession moved through London. The people wept. They saw none of it. They did not notice the dark fluid slowly staining the silk beneath her. To them, she remained immortal. But the guards escorting the casket had orders to rotate every 10 minutes. The odor, even outdoors, was too much to bear. One observer later recalled seeing flies swarming, not around the flowers, but around the Queen's bier itself. Inside, Elizabeth's body was fermenting. Her skin, painted in death, peeled beneath the fabric. Her perfume mingled with putrefaction. The very tools she used to delay her decay had hastened it. Doctors later, tasked with examining her remains, were disturbed. They found her torso blistered by chemical burns. Her organs had taken on strange colors. Her liver was black as ash. Her bones were porous. Her lungs filled with sediment, the consequence of years inhaling powders. They refused to speak of her brain. No monarch had ever decomposed so rapidly, nor had one carried so much poison in their flesh while alive. Yet, the portraits persisted. Paintings still showed her youthful, serene, ethereal. She smiled from golden frames as if time itself had spared her. But behind the paint, behind the crown, was a woman who had died long before her body gave out. Yes, her reign was legendary. She defeated the Spanish Armada, ushered in a golden age, fostered literature and the arts, dared defy Rome, built one of Europe's most iconic dynasties. But behind the grandeur was fear. Behind the glory, ruin. She was a queen terrified of being seen as weak. She chose powder over flesh, perfume over water, pride over healing. Her kingdom was built on myth, and she paid the price with her very body. Even her grave was not immune. At Westminster Abbey, beside her half-sister Mary I, she lies interred. Yet, rumours endured. Abbey workers claimed the tomb emitted a sweet but nauseating odour for years. Tourists left flowers, unaware of the truth. Children still learn of Elizabeth I, the Virgin Queen, the brilliant monarch, the lion-hearted ruler. Few are told that she spent her last years rotting slowly beneath her wig. History, like Elizabeth herself, prefers myth. But now, you know what lay beneath the powder. Behind every royal portrait is a hidden tomb, one that rots in silence and ceremony. Was Elizabeth a mirror of her age, or a prisoner of her obsession? Leave your thoughts below.